Hello folks, welcome to the canal Channel Jose. Today we're going to give you an idea how to replace a fuel filter or diesel filter on a 2012 to 2016 Duramax. And that way you get an idea how you can do this at home, so that way you don't take it to the shop. And this job costs about $800 if you take it to the dealer. So the part costs between $50 to $100, depends where you get it. But the labor, that's where you're going to save a lot. So we're going to show you a few steps that can help you do it at home and that you can save all that money. And with that, let's jump right into it. To replace a fuel filter, things that you got to do, you got to remove this air duct that goes in the intake. Remove the clamp. We're going to loosen this clamp as well. So the purpose of that is so you can prime the air out of the filter housing. You got to do that before you start your engine. So once you take the old filter out and you put the new one, you're going to have to come up here and prime the system out. To change the filter, you're going to have to remove your passenger's front tire off. So what we have done is we raised the truck and we have set it on a jack stand, and the filter is right there. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to remove the inner wall panel for the fender, and we're going to have to remove this trim as well, so we can get it out and we can work on the fuel filter. So to remove this plastic, we're going to have to use a T15 to remove 1, 2, 3, 4 screws with a T15. And then right at the front, there's a 932 screw that you have to remove as well. You go down here and there's a 1/2 inch bolt that is down here that you have to remove as well. Otherwise, if you start pulling on the trim, you're gonna break it off and that's not coming out. So we have 2 with washers and 2 with no washers. The 2 with washers go right back here, and the 2 with no washers go right here. So you keep track where the screws came out of. So now this screw right here by the front of the bumper is a 932, and we take it off. So now that we took all those out, we come over and take this 1/2 inch off. So now to pull the trim off, we're gonna have to pull this from the corner and start pulling it out. There's some clips that go into the fender all the way around. And once you pull this 932s, the 4 T15s and the 1/2 inch, now we can pull it out. Start by the front. So now that we remove the outer molding, we have to remove the splash guard, and there's 13 T15 screws that we have to remove splash guard so we can get to the filter. So now that we took all the T15 screws out that holding the splash guard towards the frame, now we can pull it from the back a little bit down and outwards, because this point is kind of tucked in, so you don't want to break this off from here, and then this is tucked in behind the bumper. So now we start slowly getting it off and guide it out. So now that we have removed the splash guard, we can see the diesel or the fuel filter right here, and that's what we're trying to get to, because you're gonna have to unspin this from the housing that is up there. So there's a sensor here and there's this cable right here that is connected to this plug. You're gonna have to disconnect the sensor because it's gonna have to unspin with the filter. So disconnect that, and then we're gonna unspin the filter from the housing. Put a rag or put rags down here, so if any fuel spill, it falls right into the rag and it absorbs it, so you don't have diesel everywhere. So now before we start taking the fuel filter out, we're gonna have to remove this air duct piece. We're gonna have to remove this 5/16 and this 5/16, or loosen these clamps, 2 of them, or flathead screwdriver, to remove this piece so we can have access to where we have to purge the air out of the system once we put the new filter. So we remove this before we start messing with the fuel filter. So now that we have loosened the two clamps, we pull this plastic from the intake and from back here, so we can pull it out and expose where we're going to purge the air out of the system once we put the new filter. Now that we took off the air box or the air intake, here's where we're going to have to purge the air out by loosening that screw or the bolt. So this is the purge area. So now we can go underneath and remove the filter. So now we disconnect the sensor, the water sensor, and then we unscrew the filter. So now what I have done is I put some rags after I disconnected the sensor, so that whenever any of the fuel comes out, it just gets caught by these rags and it doesn't go everywhere. So I keep the cleaner area. So this is going to help me capture any of the fuel that is when I'm working the fuel filter out. So now we got the fuel filter, the diesel filter. We got to take that sensor off and transfer it to the new filter. And one thing I want to say is, when don't tilt it too much because you got fuel in this. You got to get this O-ring that goes around in the outer edge off the that housing, and this rubber piece in the middle. You don't want this to stay there, or this O-ring in the edge to stay up there as well. You want to make sure they come out. So when you put the new ones, they don't overlap and you have fuel everywhere. So now we take this sensor and we transfer it to the new fuel filter. So now to take this sensor, we're using a big adjustable wrench, because if you use channel locks, you can, but if you grab it and it slips, you're gonna round off this plastic. So you don't wanna do that. So we just grab the adjustable, we set it like that, and you put it, grab the filter really good, and then you start spinning slowly and start feeling it for the threads to loosen, and then you can start and then continue by hand. So now what we do is we gotta remove this O-ring from here to put the new one in there. So what you do is, before you put the O-ring into the sensor, you get some engine oil, you rub it all over so it lubricates, so that way when it sits in there and you start threading it into the new filter, it doesn't damage itself. So now we just present the sensor to the new filter. Make sure you start threading it, find the threads so they match. And once you get it, start threading it by hand all the way as much as you can until the O-ring touches and it starts making friction. So that way you can put tools to it, because if you start from the beginning with tools, you might damage the sensor. So now that we tighten this sensor to the filter, don't over tighten it, just tighten and snug it, so that way it doesn't come loose with time. So now that we done that, we put the O-ring that goes on top. So make sure that this O-ring that goes outside falls right into the groove, and it has a square edge both sides. Both sides is the same, doesn't have up or bottom. Make sure it's in there. Put some oil in there and lubricate the middle too, so that way it slides into the housing and it doesn't bond and it rips or creates damage to the rubber. So now we put the fuel filter. So now we're gonna feed the filter through here, and it goes right in there. So we gotta thread it into that part. So that's why we gotta do it in through the side. So now that we put the fuel filter and we tighten it by hand, what we grab is our sensor connector for the water sensor, and we connect it right into the plug right here. So now we change the fuel filter, we come up here and we have to get a flathead screwdriver and we have to loosen this screw. And once you do that, you don't want to completely take it off. You just want to let it sit there. And then you're going to have to push this plunger up and down a few times, and diesel and air is going to come out of there. So you put a couple racks here so they don't run off anywhere. So you're going to have to do it a few times, maybe 6 times. Sometimes it takes 1 or 2 pumps, but we're going to do it about 6, 7 times so all the air comes out. That's the reason you got to loosen that screw and push this plunger. So now that we have taken some of the fuel out, you tighten the bolt or the screw back in, and remember it's plastic. So now that we took the air out of the fuel system or the diesel system, we tighten the screw back in, and we get our rag out. We wipe it good, and then we put our intake uh, tube back in. And before we start putting the splash guard back in, we turn on our truck to make sure everything's working properly. But remember, you got to take the air out of the system before you turn your truck on. Otherwise, you're going to have air stuck in on your injectors, and that's not good. So now before we start turning on our engine, we want to backtrack ourselves and make sure that we have done everything right. We have purged the air out after we put the new filter. The filter is connected to the sensor, so that way it doesn't give us a light at the dash, and it might come to a check engine light. And then our filter is tight, and we put our air box tube back in there. So now everything's where it should be. So now after we purge the air out, we turn on our engine. So now that we have put the fuel filter in and everything's back to normal, we can start putting the splash guard back on so we can start backtracking ourselves. So now you start fitting your splash guard, you make sure you put the front first into the bumper and then this part in there, and then you can start guiding it on the back. Start putting 2 screws in there to hold it, and then guide every single screw if you can before you tighten them. That way you can move it around, because sometimes they don't guide perfectly. So now we can start putting all that 13 screws or bolts that came out of this. So now that we have presented all the T15 screws into the splash guard, we tighten them all. So then we continue to the molding. So now that we have put the splash guard back on, we put the trim on, and remember these clips, they go straight in. So you gotta line them up and go in. And you might have this one, it might breaking off from this plastic. So if that happens, just overlap it, and then there's gonna be that screw that goes in the side that is gonna hold that. So we put them all the way around, and then we put the 4 T15s that hold this, and the 1/2 inch that goes in the bottom here, and the one that goes in the front here, which is a smaller size. So now for this screw, we use a 932s to take it off or put it back on. So now right on the back, on the bottom, you have a 1/2 inch bolt. Don't forget to put it back on. So you put that on and you tighten it with a 1/2 inch socket. So now we put everything back together. We have replaced the filter. We have the old one right here draining and drying up. So now the last thing we have to do is put our tire back on, lift the truck, take the jack stand out, and get our jack out of the way so we can start driving it again. So now that you have replaced the fuel filter in your truck or your diesel engine, now you have to reset the life, remaining life of the filter by resetting it in the dash using your knobs on your steering wheel. And we're going to show you how you do that. To reset the fuel filter life, now you have to use your up and down knob, and you're going to have to get to the fuel filter live, which is that one. Once you reach that, you go to the right. Now that you're in the reset area, you press the check mark, and that's how easy it is to reset the remaining filter life on the dash. So that way you synchronize to the new filter to the computer, so both of them are fresh, and when the computer's telling you that it's about 5%, then it's synchronized to the filter, so it's actually accurate to what the filter was reset at. Because if you don't reset this, you're gonna throw off the computer or yourself. So reset this when you replace the filter. And well, folks, hopefully this video was useful and helpful how to replace the fuel filter or diesel filter on a 2012 to 2016 Duramax. And it's pretty simple. You can do it at home. You just need to do a couple steps: remove the tire, expose the filter, and that way you're gonna save a lot of money. So that way you don't have to take it to the shop. And with that said, folks, for our friends who are watching our video, haven't subscribed to our channel, please subscribe. If you like our video, give us a thumbs up, share it, and we'll see you soon with more videos here in el canal, El Chano Jose.